Hello, this is Chuck Solomon, and welcome to the Candidate Experience Podcast, where we focus on the job candidate journey from apply to onboard and the space in between. Let's get started. You care about the candidate experience, but have you ever wondered exactly how to bring your company to that next level and offer a world-class experience to your candidates? It's not easy. Fortunately, Candidate.fyi can help. Their solution guides candidates through your hiring journey, enhancing transparency and communication at every touch point. You'll also gain valuable insights on what's working and what's not with your hiring process. Best of all, it integrates directly with your ATS. Head on over to Candidate.fyi and see how to transform your company's candidate experience today. In this planning, dodging the ATS, and Shamu episode, my guest, Ted Benson from Corralling Chaos, adds his insights into how to improve the job candidate experience. Pay special attention to his tips for hiring managers, as well as those seeking new job opportunities. If you like what you're hearing on this podcast, please subscribe and do share with others. I thank you in advance for listening, and here's my interview. Ted, I want to jump right into things. You've been a hiring manager before. From the hiring manager's perspective, what can they do to ensure a good candidate journey?
The best way I can describe this is that when you're in a situation and you're hiring, it doesn't matter if you're in a little bitty biotech or a great big multinational biopharma, you're
Sure.
generally trying to hire pretty quickly, right? You've got a real need that you want to hire. And speed is often the enemy of quality, right? I mean, if I'm trying to do something very rapidly, we have terms for it, right? Slapdash. Oh, that was slapdash job, right? Because you were rushing and weren't doing a good job, right?
Right.
You've heard that, right?
Yep.
Exactly. So there's a dynamic there where you need to balance the speed with quality. And so what I've gotten reasonably adept at over the years is hiring teams quickly and efficiently, and balancing that speed and that quality. And I'm going to boil it down to really a single sentence, and then we'll talk around that for about a little while as we expand on the idea. And
Sure.
Effectively, accelerating hiring is about preparing to hire, right? Being ready to hire. That's the very high level statement that I'm going to make. You have to be prepared to hire people. And that means being very, very ready and having a real understanding of what your needs are and how they can be filled. One of my favorite sayings, and I'm sure you and your listeners may have heard this as well, failing to plan is planning to fail, right?
Sure.
Right. So it's not that it's hard to do. It's that people frequently don't feel like they have the time. But, like anything else, if it matters to you, you have to prioritize it. And prioritize it means taking the time to do it. So preparing. You have to make time to plan. If you want to make a meal, right? Let's say you want to make meatloaf, right? You got to say, well, okay, what meatloaf do I want to make? Okay, do I have the recipe? And then you see, do I have the ingredients, right? So you have to have all those pieces in place. Know your ingredients are at hand before you start. Otherwise, you're wasting your time. And yet it still is somewhat amazing to me when I have seen people go, well, we need to hire this person to do this job. And, what exactly does that person need to do? Well, they need to be a molecular biologist, let's say, or they need to be a cell biologist. Okay, well, what is it exactly that they're going to do? Because those two skill sets can overlap, or they can be very different, depending
Sure.
on the nature of the task at hand. So essentially, I've set the very high level goal, which is about preparing, being ready. And then I'm going to break that down for you, and feel free to jump in here.
Sure.
You've got to define clear goals, objectives, and a timeline for the work, whether it's a project or whether it's an ongoing thing. If you're in a biotech, hey, we're trying to get a proof of concept across the wire by the end of the year, and so we need to do X, Y, and Z in order to get there, right? If it's a big pharma, similarly, you may not be doing a POC, you may be doing a production run or something of that sort of thing. But you've got to have a clear sense of what you're going for. And then I'm going to take that to another step, which is talking about pain and opportunity. if I'm in a small biotech or I'm a big pharma and I'm trying to hire somebody, or if I'm in a mom and pop pizza shop, or if I'm in a car repair place and I decide I need to hire somebody, I'm doing that because I have a pain or I have an opportunity. Either the guy who used to do our brake jobs at our auto shop just quit. I got to find somebody to replace him. Otherwise, I'm going to lose all that brake job work. Or we've never done brake jobs here before, but we want to start doing brake jobs here. And so we're going to add a guy to do that. So pain or opportunity is the basic reason why hiring managers are going to hire, to fix a problem or to grow the business. And then as a hiring manager, you have to be honest, right? You have to understand your need to have versus your want to have, and you have to loop in the stakeholders that are part of that project or part of that initiative so that you get input and feedback from those people. Does that make sense so far?
It does. And I'm hoping that the guy that does my brakes at my garage is the best one they can find.
Absolutely. So that's a perfect segue. This is almost like we planned this. Well, really nice job. But based on that, saying what is it that your needs are, then you can say, okay, here is the defined skill set and experience. The guy who does brakes or the gal who does brakes, how much experience do they need to have? What specific systems do they work on? Are you working on Mack trucks or are you working on Toyota Priuses, right? What's the skill set? What's the experience? And then, of course, obviously, as a hiring manager, it's somebody in the organization. If it's not the manager, it's got to be somebody, has to figure out what's the compensation package range, right? What's typical for that kind of position in the industry. And again, having come from a biotech background, sometimes you hire people, you go, look, we can't pay you as much as the market would be for this particular role, but we can throw something in that's non-cash, right? It might be benefits, it might be stock options, something that sort of has a sense of okay, there's an additional value here beyond simply the monetary piece. And then, of course, obviously, as a hiring manager, you also have to figure out what are the deal breakers. If somebody is a brake person and they've only worked on Priuses, and you need them to be able to work on everything from Japanese cars to American cars, and for some reason there's a big enough difference there, then maybe there's a deal breaker there. You really can't hire somebody if they haven't worked on the range of those things. And then finally, and I mentioned this before, of course, the deadlines for those hiring processes. You do have this balance between speed and quality, but if you're hiring to meet a real pain or a real opportunity in the organization, you've got to hit that window. It's really important. And, if you're not going to show that kind of self-discipline internally, then you're probably not going to be effective at running the entire process going forward as well.
Sure.
So that's the sort of high level things. Does that make sense so far?
It totally does. Quick question for you.
Yes, sir.
So you've worked in different sized companies. Would you say that the larger Fortune 5 company sized company is more adept or less adept than, say, a smaller, sort of small to medium sized company at this process?
So I think the larger companies have the advantage in the sense that they often have a more structured process.
Sure.
And I was going to get to this later on, that a structured interview is critical as part of the hiring process. And sometimes small companies may not have a lot of structure around the hiring process. They might just say, bring the prospect, the candidate in, have them sit down and have a sort of unstructured conversation with people. And while that can give you some information, it's kind of hard to do a comparison, right? Because if you have a different conversation with candidate A and candidate B, how are you going to decide between the two of them, right? There has to be some kind of commonality there in order for you to say, okay, we talked about the same topics with A and B, and A gave better answers, or B gave better answers, or whatever the case may be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, totally.
Okay, cool.
What I guess I'm guessing that you're a firm believer in having the job description, out there. Do you think hiring managers should go ahead and, before they say they need another brake specialist, we keep talking about mechanics here, like, should they actually go through and review the job description, say it's a year old or 2 years old, should they go back in and amend that, or just say, well, we're looking for the same kind of person?
Well, again, ideally you're prepared, right? You know the nature of the position you're trying to fill, and you know the exact requirements for this particular role in this particular project or task. And again, to be clear, I kind of implied in my last answer that small companies can't do great hiring. They can do great hiring. In fact, they may do even better hiring because they really understand how vital that one person is when they've only got 6 people in the company, right? That one more person is really important, and so they may do a great job at really making sure that person's the right fit. So I don't mean to diss small companies for hiring, but getting back to your question, I do think you need, as a hiring manager, to say, am I don't want to say this harshly, but am I hiring cogs or am I hiring people? I need to know what the role is now that they need to fill, and I need to find the right person for that role. If you just say, well, it's the same role as it was last year, as it was last year, it's kind of implying that there's an interchangeability, right? And while all of us bring certain skills that are somewhat interchangeable, we also bring unique strengths and weaknesses that it makes sense for the company to be aware of and to harness effectively in order to really let us not only bring our whole selves to work, but maximize our impact when we're in that workplace.
Sure. I'm not sure if you've read the book Powerful by Patty McCord yet. But Patty was the former chief human resources officer at Netflix. And there's a famous slide deck that Netflix put out that she was the prime author of that, along with their CEO, Reed Hastings. And it sort of lays out sort of their process of hiring and stuff. And to your point about, making sure you're hiring for the job you need done, she talks very eloquently about how, Netflix started off as a DVD distribution company, and the people they hired to do that sort of work are far different than what they're doing, when they changed from DVD distribution to a streaming company. So they actually help move people along because they didn't need people that were good at distribution. They needed people that were good at engineering media streaming. Now they're actually getting into content creation, so they're needing even different people for that content creation. So
that's an excellent point there. That's an excellent series of points there, Chuck. And in fact, that brings me to another topic I wanted to touch on, which is part of understanding what the role requirements are is understanding how much you want or need that person to grow in that role. And so, for example, from getting back to that sort of, are you hiring a person or you're hiring a cog? Ideally, you're hiring people who will take care of the problems you have today, the pain of the opportunity, and then who will be able to then grow either in that role or by transferring to other roles, laterally or up or whatever, through training or through additional knowledge or just experience. The example I give from my own personal experience, the very first biotech I was hired at, I was hired in specifically to do molecular biology, to create genetic constructs that could then be used for protein production. So I cranked out all these genetic constructs that we could use for protein production, and it was still a small company. And they said, now we actually need to produce the proteins. How do you feel about doing that? And so I jumped in and I did that. I said, yeah, absolutely. It'd be fun to learn. And so I figured it out and I learned it and it was great. And then, okay, now we had all these proteins in the freezer. Now we need to format test systems with those proteins. How do you feel about doing that? I'm like, yeah, sure, bring it. Let's do it, man. And so I jumped into that. And then, it just kept going and going. So I moved down the process as the process was being developed. And it was fun. I got to help build all these systems and learn all this stuff. So there are times when, and ideally that should be almost all the time in my experience, people love to develop, they love to learn, they love to grow. People find it very rewarding. There are people who want to stay in their lane and become a very deep expert, let's say, in one particular area. And that's great too. That's a form of development as well. You don't have to go all over the map to develop. You can just become a deep expert in one's solitary domain. And that's of tremendous value potentially as well. So again, what is it that you want in that role, right? As you're hiring for that kind of position, what are the requirements? And you should build in the ability for people to learn and grow in that role. It's going to be better for them. It's going to be better for everybody else. They're going to realize their human potential, and that's something that you ought to support, and that helps you.
Yeah, agreed.
So a couple of other thoughts in terms of being an effective hiring manager and running a process. Using existing professional networks to identify or contact people who have the skill sets you need
Sure.
is a great approach. I've been recruited into a couple of companies that way, and it's a great way of saying, okay, we need a person who does X. Does anybody here know somebody who does X? Oh, yeah, I do. Okay, great. Talk to your friend. And, there's nothing wrong with that, and you get a sort of immediate sense of who's available and what they can do. Building
Yep.
on that and related to it, using ads or recruiters is not a bad thing. I mean, there's some people who don't feel comfortable doing that, but it can be really time efficient if time is at an issue without sacrificing a ton of quality, because in principle they have some of these people sort of on their books already, on their records, and they can pull them in fairly quickly for interviews. So unless your budget is crazy tight, it's something to consider. And then the next piece is when you do run the interviews themselves. I'm a big believer in having a small hiring team
Sure.
to screen or score the applicants. So, you get in a bunch of resumes, particularly if you don't have if you're not in a big company, you don't have a big HR, back office to screen this stuff. You can quickly go through, dozens of resumes in a night or two at home. Just, everybody takes so many home and they just quickly score them and say, okay, here we go. What are the accomplishments? And a key piece of that is, again, what are you actually looking for? You've got defined, we need X, Y, and Z. Does this person have X, Y, and Z? And then you can quickly score them based on that. Reducing the candidate list then to just a few candidates, maybe 3 or 4. You run some quick phone interviews. And again, I would suggest that to be a team-based thing, because you can have 6 people in the room and, you can all just sort of weigh in after the call and say, yeah, this person looks good in this way or not so good in this way. And then, maybe the phone calls are just 30 minutes apiece. You can knock out a whole bunch in an afternoon. And then you can bring in 2 or 3 candidates for in-person interviews.
Sure.
Typically, in my experience, and I don't know about you, Chuck, but in my experience, sequential one-on-one interviews with a couple of senior leaders that are, again, structured and consistent. Having structured and consistent interviews is so very important in order to allow for genuine comparability between candidates. And, have those be behavioral, right? The classic, tell me about a time you whatever, right? And then team interviews along the same lines with coworkers, right? Colleagues, people who'd be working with them, candidate on a daily basis. I think that's a really healthy way to have the candidate quickly see and size up the team culture, right? Or is everybody sort of kidding around and friendly, or are they very serious? Or is it clear that there's some people who are really sort of leading the group, or is it a very collegial, egalitarian situation? The only key piece with that, if a company's going to do team interviewing, is to make sure typically the person with the most energy sort of dominates the conversation. So it's really important for there to be somebody
Right.
in the room who makes sure that the introverts get a chance to ask questions or give their opinions. That's really, really important. And then
Sure.
I'm a big fan of making the hiring decision the day after the last in-person interview. The bottom line for all of this, again, is preparing, having your ducks in a row. And I would say that one of the biggest mistakes people make is assuming that hiring managers know how to hire out of the box. So I encourage companies
Right.
to spend a little bit of time to train their hiring managers how to hire, because people aren't born knowing how to do it.
Sure. Or they think that since they've been the recipient, on the other side of the table, they think they can do just as well on the other side. It's the same concept of, people get promoted to managerial levels and they're managing people, but they don't have any experience nor training in managing people. I think that blends well into sort of, you need to learn managerial skills and also be able to go ahead. And part of that is hiring and interviewing people.
Absolutely. Again, nobody knows how to walk when they're born, right? I mean,
Right.
to assume that someone knows how to be a manager without prior experience, I don't care how great they are at task X, whether it's changing brakes or flipping pizzas or cloning genes. You can't just assume that those very skilled, very capable, wonderful people necessarily know how to help other people succeed, right? Those are different skill sets. And so if you don't encourage that and foster that and grow that and train people, then I think you're just, as I like to say, you're just, letting things grow in your garden without actually going in and tending it.
Sure. Well, great tips there. Thanks for that, Ted.
Sure.
Tell me about the other side of the fence here, or rather not fence, but table. Tell
Sure.
me about tell me about what tips you would offer to job seekers, because they certainly don't control the process. However, I think there might be some things that they could do to sort of help them in their candidate journey.
Sure. So I think probably everyone throughout their life gets at least a couple of terrible interview experiences.
Sure.
And I think that's absolutely par for the course. And I think that kind of hangs over the discussion in general. I think there's another piece here that because you hear about these things. Oh my gosh, I blew the interview, and so then you get your expectations really really low. But I think there's actually something more subtle going on here too, which is that we don't usually interview, right? I mean, most people, they interview a few times in their working career, maybe 10 times, maybe 20 times, maybe 100 times, but they don't do it every single day, right?
Right.
The metaphor I give is, air travel versus plane travel. If you're in a group of 100 people and you ask, who here is, at least a little nervous about flying, maybe actually scared of it, you'll see a certain number of hands go up, right? You ask the same question about cars, and basically nobody's hands go up, right? And it's not that cars are safer than planes. We know cars are less safe than planes, right? But planes
Right.
are less familiar. Cars are more familiar. We do it on a regular basis, so we tend to just disregard the risks. Interviews are the same kind of way. They're like the airplane travel. If you don't interview all the time, then it's this scary thing that you only do occasionally, and you only do it when you really need or really want a job, so the stakes are high, right? And it's this weird, artificial, extremely evaluative situation where you're supposed to go in and tell somebody everything about yourself professionally and why you're such a wonderful and amazing person. And you're supposed to do it in less than 30 seconds, right? Or maybe 30 minutes if you get a nice sit down interview.
Right.
It's
Right.
completely ridiculous, right? I mean, it's absurd in the face of it. And at the same time, it's high stakes, it's artificial, it's weird. And the final piece, of course, is there's usually a significant power imbalance, right? Usually, if I'm looking for a job, and I can tell you a great story. Years ago, I was working for a biotech, and we were doing well, and things were humming along, things looked good. And one Sunday night, my wife and I discovered we were expecting our second child, and we're like, "Oh, this is so great, and this is great," and I just feel wonderful. And I go into work, and you know where this is going, right? The next
Right.
day, I go into work, and it's like, there's an all hands meeting at 10 a.m. Oh no!
Right.
And then and then at 10 a.m. The staff, the leadership, the management stands up and says to the staff, "We're really sorry to tell you this. You guys have done a great job, but we're shutting down. Everybody will be done by the end of the week, except for a couple of people who turn out the lights."
Right.
And so there we are, right? And so I went home, and I mean, I've got a baby on the way. I already had another one in the house, and I couldn't sleep for a week, right? So when I said, "Oh my gosh, I got to find another job," there was a serious power imbalance in the sense that I needed to find a job, right? I
Right.
needed that job right away. And so there is a lot of times when people need to find a job. They've been let go. They've had something really untoward happen. They just realized that they can't make it on that pay that they had, or they had some sort of argument with their boss. They can be in a situation where they really need a job. Even if they're not, if they really want this new job, they really are excited about it. There's that power imbalance, right? They're coming as a supplicant. And so that power imbalance can affect people's sense of empowerment in the conversation. It can make them feel like a victim. It can make them feel like they really are at a loss. And so that power imbalance is also a really negative aspect when people even think about interviewing. So, of course, people aren't very good at it, and they're not very comfortable at it, right? That all makes sense, right?
Yep.
So should I dive into how I suggest people would deal with all that?
I mean, please share, what suggestions you would have that, what job candidates can do to sort of become more confident and do better. I bet you have some great tips on that.
Well, I've got tips. I hope they're great. You and the listeners will decide that. But the first one is going to sound familiar to anybody who heard the first half of this podcast, which is prepare, right? Prepare. So you can address all of those things and stand out, first of all, by preparing. So research the company. know their mission, vision, and values, and why they're hiring, right? I mentioned before the pain and opportunity situation for a hiring manager. There's a reason the hiring manager is hiring. They have a pain or an opportunity that they want you to address. If you understand that, you've got an immediate advantage, right? And then scan your network for people who were or are there and ask them about the company. I've done this before. You go, oh, this person worked for Company X. I'm applying to Company X. You contact them. You say, so how was Company X? And maybe they say, oh, it's great. I really loved being there. I just got a great other opportunity to leave. Or else, in one case, I remember they said, oh my gosh, the culture is toxic. The place is terrible. You don't want to go there. And, you're okay, all right, well, good to know. Right. So then you can write down as well, and work out. So that pain opportunity piece, write down how you think you can help them, right? Come up with your own little elevator speech, right? It can be very simple, but it's a very clear cut explanation of how you can help them, I'm talking like maybe a sentence or two, really concise. And then the corollary to that complements that is creating what I like to call STAR stories. And you probably have heard of this, Chuck.
Yep.
STAR standing for situation, task, action, result, right?
Yep. These work well in those behavioral type interviews.
Exactly. And the key is they are true stories that show how you have made immediate positive impact in situations relevant to the position you're interviewing for, right? And the idea is you're going to build trust with that hiring manager by demonstrating your ability, your good intent, your integrity, and the value you bring, right? So you're going to say, man, I saved this one project by going off the cliff by doing X, Y, Z. And when I did that, we got great results and everybody was happy, whatever the details are. Again, it's longer than an elevator speech. It's got more detail and more facts attached to it so that it's very clear what your contributions were and very clear what the impact of that was. And then the next piece is, and I'm sure this is something that you would recommend as well, Chuck, which is practice, right?
Sure.
If you're trying to learn how to walk, boy, you better try walking, and you learn to play the piano or change brakes or whatever it is. By doing something repeatedly, you reduce the unfamiliarity, the discomfort. We get better at anything with practice. And then go to networking events, see how others introduce themselves. Hone your elevator speech and your STAR stories. I've gone to some of these networking events, and there are some people who stand up and, man, they nail their STAR story, like 4 sentences long. There was this, I was this, and I did this, and that there was a result, and it was amazing. And you just go, wow, why wouldn't anyone hire that person, right?
Sure.
And being able to do that in a crowd is going to make it so easy to do it on a one-on-one basis, right? And then practice with friends, invite a friend to coffee, interview, have them interview you, and then just repeat it until you feel really comfortable with that sort of rhythm. Of course, you'll get some curveballs in an interview, but at least you'll be, sort of comfortable with your basics, your fundamentals. The next piece I would strongly suggest is I spoke about that power imbalance. So part of addressing that is to lower the pressure and the imbalance. Again, sometimes you're desperate for a job, but try not to be desperate, right? Put yourself in a position where you are working at the moment and build up some savings so that you have a little bit of savings so that if you do get caught out, maybe you don't have to take the first thing across the plate. And then acknowledge to yourself that the interview may make you anxious. Admit, okay, I know interviews may make me anxious. And then this is great, Chuck. This is actually a little bit of neuroscience. The emotion of anxiety is actually really close to the emotion for excitement.
Right.
So if you can convince yourself you're not anxious, you're actually excited. It can work. Right. It can actually work. It's amazing. I suggest you try it sometime with something that you're anxious about. It's really cool. And then, of course, you want to approach them with an open body language and a cheerful, confident voice. And I'll come back to that in a second. But again, be aware of the needs in the conversation. They have a need or they wouldn't be hiring, right?
Sure.
You have what they need. So the interview is about their needs, but it should be about yours, the interviewee, as well. So be prepared and be ready to find out if this is a place where you want to work, right? Have questions ready, like, what are the major opportunities facing this company? What are the major challenges facing this company? How is the company approaching those? Do you think senior leaders here are tackling things well? If you could change one thing, what would it be? Would you recommend this company to friends who are job seekers? Those are all pretty meaty, right?
Certainly.
Right. And they're intended to provoke discussion, right? Because those are not yes or no questions in general, right?
Sure.
Okay. So then here's the piece that I think your listeners would probably really, really find interesting and fun. Ways to stand out, right? Ways to stand out.
Absolutely.
Underscore. Yeah. Okay. So here we go. Underscore.
How do you stand out is really important there, because
it is.
For all the tips that you said there, I think there's great resources online to sort of practice and things like that. But if everyone is doing that, if you're not, you kind of have to go beyond what everyone else is doing, to your point of how do you stand out?
Right. And so by saying this and having who knows who listen to it, it's going to dilute the impact, right? So I probably shouldn't say how to stand out, right?
Right.
but I'll be generous.
I think people stand out. People have to find their own way. And I want to hear your tip for how to stand out, but people have to find their own way, because that's bringing your whole self to work. And what works for Ted might not work for Chuck. So vice versa.
Exactly right. Exactly right. In fact, I'm going to get to that in 10 seconds, because the first thing I'm going to say is, as you're approaching the end of the interview in particular, but throughout the interview, right, you want to be underscoring why they should hire you, right? And the reasons they would hire Chuck are different from the reasons they would hire Ted, right? And so that's one way that it's unique to you. What is the unique value you bring, and how do you bring that, right? What's that trust component look like for you? How do they trust you, and how do they understand that value? And that is absolutely unique to every candidate. And then this is a general perspective. Be happy, be confident, be glad to see them. If you're in an interview, you beat out most of the applicants to get there, right? I mean, you've dodged the ATS, you've made it through the filter, whatever, right? And so you're good, or you wouldn't be there, right? They invited you, and they want to like you. They want to trust you. So, you should smile. You should make friendly eye contact. You've already kind of won some of the competition here. You're past the worst of it. You're down to the final leg. So you should be confident about that and happy. And then, of course, listen really well throughout, and ask the questions based on what you hear. And then got a couple of other ideas here right at the end. I like to relax and have fun in interviews. And I know that sounds really counterintuitive, but this kind of gets back to flipping the power dynamic a little bit, right?
Sure.
You can include jokes. You can joke as long as, they're respectful, they're light in tone, you're not touching on really controversial stuff. You can joke about the weather or traffic or things like that. To give you a great example, I interviewed at one company that was a big pharma company, and I walked in the front door and met the hiring manager, and we chatted for a second, and I looked past him and I saw a big fountain behind him that was painted blue, the way they do with fountains, a light sky blue thing, and there was some water running. And I looked at the fountain, and I looked back at him, and I sort of gestured towards the fountain, and I said, "So tell me, when does Shamu come out?" and he laughed, and then we did the rest of the interview, the whole day, 6 different interviews, blah blah blah. I left. He wound up making me the offer, and a couple of weeks after I started, I said, by the way, I wanted to say thanks again for hiring me. And he said, "Are you kidding? You had me at Shamu." Right? Because he said it fit with him. Now, obviously, not everyone is going to appreciate humor, and again, you've got to be careful about deploying it inappropriately or on inappropriate topics that might be offensive. If you're a very serious person, maybe you don't want to joke around because you wouldn't want to work in a joking environment, right? Maybe that's not the fit for you. But I'm a fan of using humor to diffuse tension in situations, and it worked really well in that case, for one. And then I'm going to give you a couple of last tips that I strongly recommend for people. And this is both based on how you are ending that interview process, at the end of it. You want to look the person who's interviewing you in the eye as you're heading out the door, as they're saying goodbye. It's usually the hiring manager or the HR manager, and you want to be able to say this honestly. And if you can't say it honestly, you shouldn't say it. This is only something when you say it when you mean it. Sure. And you look them in the eye, you smile, and you say something like, "I'm definitely interested in this job." If you feel it, you should say it. And you should say it because you feel it. And, you could add a couple of details beforehand, like, I really enjoyed meeting the team today, and I think this would be an awesome place for me to be, and I think I could make a great contribution. Just a couple of things that really sort of hammer on the things that really did impress you. It's a genuine statement. And then you say, I am definitely interested in this job. And they're going to remember that. And the piece on that then follows on that is, for heaven's sake, send a thank you note. Send a thank you note. It can be, a day later. It can be 48 hours later, whatever. It can be by email. That's totally fine. But if you really did like the opportunity, if you really did appreciate meeting people, tell them, whether they hire you or not, they're going to remember that you were a good person and that you knew the social niceties. And it's going to incline them to hire, not to not hire. And those last two pieces, the I'm interested in this job and that thank you note, really come down to an insight that I learned, quite frankly, from someone I worked with at one of the biopharmas I was at, who, when we were discussing various things about effectiveness of managers and so forth and so on, she shared with me an absolutely marvelous quote from Maya Angelou, which the poet, which is, "I will not remember what you say to me, but I will remember how you make me feel."
Great quote.
And if you can take that act of trust and confidence and tell somebody, I think I would really fit in here. I think I would really enjoy helping you. And you say that to them directly, and then you say that to them in an email. They already know you have the ability. That's how you got in the door. That's how you got the interview. But to take that step and make that personal connection and say, I would really like to work with you. I mean, if it's a genuine act done out of a genuine emotion in your heart and in your thoughts in your mind that you really want to be there and you really want to work with them, there's no downside to that. There's no downside to that, and they will remember that, and they'll remember you.
I agree. Ted, is there, if people wanted to get a hold of you, how would people go ahead and get a hold of you?
Sure, that's fine. I'm happy to give you my email address. As I'm sure you'll say in my introduction, my company is, I'm a managing partner at Corralling Chaos, and I set that up with Gerald Bonner last year. And he and I are managing consultants, and so we are really happy to help people. And I really like to help people with the interviewing questions as well. And if people want to get a hold of me, they can ping me at ted.benson@corrallingchaos.com, and that's 2 R's and 2 L's. You can check out our website if you want to learn a little bit more about us, or you can look me up on LinkedIn under Ted Benson. But again, ted.benson, that's BENSON, at corrallingchaos.com, 2 R's, 2 L's in corralling.
Ted, thank you. Thanks for listening to the Candidate Experience Podcast. You can reach out to us via our website, thecx.xyz. That's THECX.xyz.